In Ontario, you may be familiar with the idea that I'm about to share with you, or I guess the example that I'm going to share with you. If you've watched TV at all, I'm sure you have seen the Lotto Max Dream Big commercials. Oh my goodness, they are on all the time, but they actually have an interesting idea in them. See, in each of these commercials, they have someone who's called a dream coach, who's there to challenge the individual that they're talking to dream bigger. No, that's not good enough. Keep dreaming, picture something better, something bigger. When we are new in our faith, we need someone like that in our corner to teach us, dream bigger. Think of something better than what you can picture, because what you're picturing, God can do more than that. We've been talking about finding faith at all ages. And last week we talked about this idea that in our faith we need both seriousness and joy. Both of these components together give us the ability to really see our faith in a holistic way. This week we're going to be focusing in on this idea of imagination. So the joy side of things, where we get the opportunity to really just focus in using our brain power to picture things and use metaphors and illustrations to really understand what it is that God can do and will do in our lives. As new Christians, this is really important for children, but we often lose out on how important this is also for adults of the faith who are just coming to know who Jesus is. It's this idea that, we grow up and we get boring, and our imagination wanes. But the thing is, as adults, we need this more than ever. Next week, we'll get to the serious business and talk about holistic doctrine. But this week, let's focus in on what imagination can do for our faith. First, let's just address the question, does imagination actually do anything for our faith? Absolutely. I'd like to use a scripture from Matthew chapter 25, and it really focuses on this whole story between verses 14 and 30. It's the parable of the talents. Now, I'm not going to read the whole story, so I will give you a quick recap for those of you who may not be familiar with it. In this story, there is a man who owns 3 slaves or servants. The translation's a little weird here, but the 3 people who are servants of this man, he gives them each an amount of money. So the first one he gives 5 talents. The next one he gives 2 talents. And the last one he gives 1 talent. So you can tell there's one of the servants gets a large amount of money. The next one gets a medium. The last one gets a small amount of money. Each of the servants is tasked to take care of the money. The one who gets the most amount of money makes the most amount of money on it. And so instead of just keeping the 5 talents safe for his master, he goes out, he traded with others, and he makes 5 more. So he has 10 talents to give back to the master, twice as much money as he was given. The second one did the same thing. He went out and got twice as much money. But the last guy, who's given the least amount of money, he went out, dug a hole in the ground, and hid the master's money because he was afraid. And so in verse 25, when the master comes home, he goes to the young man who had given the least amount of money to and says, what happened? Why, like, all the others made double, why didn't you? And so what he says is this: I was afraid, and I hid your talent in the ground. Here's what is yours. The master is blown away because he didn't double it like all the others. He'd given him the money as a test of his abilities and his trust. And he responds in verse 27 and saying, you should have at least invested my money with the bankers. And then on my return, I would have gotten what was mine plus interest. Instead, he buried it in the ground. So as a kid, I kind of thought like, oh, investment banking in the Bible, cool. This is going to be useful someday. Not right now. I mean, it's good. I did learn some things from that, but as an adult, I read this and I see something else that's happening here. There's an element of imagination that gave the first 2 men the idea to go out and secure more. To go out and dream up some way that they can get more for their master before he returns, so that what he has given can be more. And it's an interesting idea, is it not? where when we are creative with our faith, we can have a greater experience than when we just expect the day-to-day. Have you ever walked into a church service or tuned in online and just had an expectation that God was going to be present? When he shows up, there is something so incredible in those services. When we go into our faith with anticipation and imagination of what God can do, we won't be disappointed. We aren't disappointed when we go into things with imagination, but when we safeguard ourselves and we hide away our faith and we protect it by burying it, nothing comes of that. Nothing ever comes from that but disappointment. Disappointment in how others are acting, in how others are treating you, disappointment that life isn't what you thought it would be. Our imagination gives us a creative outlet in our faith, but it also gives us a better way to understand tough moments. So a couple of weeks ago, we did a series on biblical lament. In that series on biblical lament, we talked about what it was to experience grief and hurt and pain. But let's face it, sometimes we're not ready to deal with those things and understand what God says about those things, but we are ready to hear a story about those things. So this is where imagination can be incredibly helpful in our faith. It can be helpful when we're reading the parables and the teachings of Jesus Christ that are done through story form, but it can also be really helpful when we pick up a good novel that teaches us the wonderful things about our faith. C.S. Lewis wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, 7 books that deal with different aspects of faith. He wrote them as a catechism, in a sense, a catechism that could be used with children and used to help foster a sense of imagination in our faith so that we as individuals can come to terms with parts of our lives that we may not be ready to deal with head on. We talk about books in the blog as being a wonderful outlet for us to experience these moments in faith. But as I've been thinking about it, there are a couple of other really important things that we can also use as tools to foster imagination in our faith. How many times have you ever watched a really amazing movie that teaches you something incredible about your life, and then you realize that relates to this thing I read in Scripture? How many times have you played an amazing game of Dungeons and Dragons or another role-playing game and realized, wow, that moment was really redemptive. That moment gave me a lot of hope as my character. I wonder what that would be like in my faith, to have similar moments. These are just games and tools and movies and wonderful things that can be used to help point to faith. Imagination is such a powerful tool for us. In fact, there is a missionary that we celebrate in, today. This is the anniversary of his death. His name is William Carey. He served in India for over 40 years, and I was privileged to read one of his quotes today that was shared with me on Facebook. He wrote, "Expect great things and attempt great things." When we engage our faith with our imagination, we have this opportunity to come with expectation to our faith. And then we have the opportunity to attempt those great things, because once we dream them and we've seen God do big things, we can dream bigger and see God do even bigger things and even better things. There's something so powerful about seeing these Ebenezer moments like we might see from 1 Samuel chapter 7, where God has brought us this far, and so we make this a moment of God can bring me this far, so how much further can he bring me? And so we create these opportunities by using our imagination to dream, what can God do? So the challenge for you this week is simple. What is one thing in your faith or your life that you can imagine or dream bigger? What is one thing that you could do or tell yourself each day or pray about that you want to see God do bigger and better things in? Use your imagination and engage it in your faith this week as we go forward. See what God can do when you start dreaming bigger things in your life. I can guarantee you, he won't disappoint. We joke about these kids that pray for Ferraris, but what if God actually brought one? I'm not saying that that's going to be the case, but what is one thing that you can dream bigger this week? God bless, guys.